Sometimes life gives you tough choices that hurt a lot before they make you stronger. In the rough mountains of Montana back in the 1800s, a 20-year-old girl named Abigail Henderson is super hungry and all alone in her old, falling-apart cabin. Then a tough mountain guy named Silas McGrow shows up at her door and says something shocking. "Starting tonight, you're here to have my kids," he says. "This isn't about love, it's about staying alive." But in the wild, messy wilderness, this weird deal turns into something they didn't see coming. What happens when two hurt people need each other to keep going? Can real love grow from the toughest starts? Before we dive back into the story, tell us where you're listening from. And if this story grabs you, make sure to follow us, because tomorrow, I've got something super cool saved for you. The gold ring on Abigail Henderson's finger caught the little bit of morning light coming through the cabin's cracked window. It was her mom's ring, the only valuable thing she had left, and the only reminder of a time when love meant something big. She twisted it gently, her fingers shaking, not because it was cold in October, but because she was thinking about the guy who stood at her door 3 days ago, his big shadow filling the doorway. Silas McGrow wasn't the kind of guy who asked for stuff. He said things like they were facts, like talking about the weather. "Winter's gonna be rough," he said, looking at her skinny face and empty shelves. "You won't make it alone." She knew he was right. The summer had been mean. First, no rain, then floods that washed away her tiny garden. The few neighbors left in these far-off mountains had moved to easier places, leaving her as the only person in what used to be a small town. Her parents died 2 winters ago from a fever that came and went before help could show up. At 18, she thought she could handle things alone. At 20, with just a tiny bit of flour and a super harsh winter coming, being brave felt like something she couldn't afford. Silas waited while she thought about what he said. He stood there calm, like a guy used to letting the mountains talk first. When she finally looked at him, he kept talking in that same straight-up way. "I got a cabin that'll keep you warm and fed. I got supplies to get you through till spring and know how to keep you alive after that." The quiet after he spoke felt longer than the shadows creeping across her floor. She saw his rough hands resting by his sides, noticing how he stood carefully, not scary, but not sorry either. This guy didn't make offers lightly. "What do you want back?" she asked, even though part of her already knew the answer would change. "Everything." His words still rang in her head. "Starting tonight, you're here to have my kids." Those words hit her hard, not because they were mean, but because they were so practical. No sweet talk about love or being buddies, no promises of being happy, just the plain truth of what he needed and what he'd give her in return. Abigail spent the last 3 days thinking hard about that truth. As her stomach got hungrier and the nights got colder, she walked around her cabin looking at everything she owned, her mom's sewing kit, her dad's few books, a few of her own things that suddenly seemed pointless compared to staying alive. The walls felt like they were closing in as she pictured the long winter ahead, alone with nothing but her pride. Silas McGrow was known in these mountains, but hardly anyone talked to him. He showed up almost 10 years ago, a guy already toughened by loss, setting up a home in the farthest part of the area. People told different stories about him. Some said he was an army scout. Others thought he was running from something back east. A few whispered he lost a wife and kid, but no one knew the details. Everyone agreed he was good at surviving. Silas McGrow made it where other guys didn't. His cabin was strong and full of supplies. His trapping got him enough furs to trade for stuff twice a year when he went to town. He knew these mountains like other people know their backyards, and he'd helped more than one person get through tough times. He was also a guy without a family, almost 40, with no sons to help with work or carry his name. In a place where surviving often meant having enough people to do all the hard jobs, his situation was as risky as hers. She noticed the hunting. Knife on his belt, old but well kept, the kind passed down from father to son. The worn handle made her wonder if he got it from his own dad, if it was the kind of thing he wanted to pass on in these tough mountains. When she asked why he picked her, why not find a wife in town where women had more choices, his answer was straight up. Town women want stuff I can't give, like churches, neighbors, and stores nearby. They want a different life than what these mountains have. You already know what it's like to live here. You know what it costs. And you're still here. That tells me you're strong." His words, if they were a compliment, felt weird coming from him. Silas McGrow didn't seem like a guy who said nice things just to be nice, which made his words mean more. He saw her not as a weak girl to take advantage of, but as someone who'd shown she could handle tough times. "I won't lie about what I'm offering," he went on. "It won't be easy, and it's not what most women dream of. But you'll have food, warmth, and safety, and any kids we have will be taken care of. I don't drink too much, I don't lose my temper, and I pay what I owe. If you can say that about most guys, you've been lucky." She asked for time to think, and he gave it to her without arguing. "I'll be back in 3 days," he said. "If you say yes, be ready to go with me. If you say no, I'll respect that and leave you alone." The respect in his voice surprised her. This wasn't a guy trying to push or trick her. He was offering a fair deal, even if the terms were harsher than anything she'd ever thought about. Now, sitting in her childhood cabin as the sun set on the 3rd day, Abigail faced her choice. She could stay independent and probably die before spring, or take Silas's deal and trade her freedom for staying alive. But was it really freedom she'd lose? Or just the idea of it? What good was being on her own if it meant starving? What was the point of her pride if no one was left to care? She thought of her parents, buried in the little cemetery that used to serve the town. They were practical people who made hard choices to live in this tough place. Would they get her decision, or would they be shocked by what she was thinking? The sound of horse hooves broke her thoughts. Through the window, she saw Silas McGrow riding up, right on time. He sat on his horse with the same steady confidence he always had, a guy okay with his own choices. Her mom's wedding ring felt heavier as she watched him get off his horse. In a few minutes, she'd have to tell him her answer, and whatever she picked would decide not just if she lived or died, but who she'd become. Silas knocked once, firm but not pushy. When she opened the door, he took off his hat and waited for her to talk first. His eyes saw her packed bags by the door, but his face stayed calm. "I've decided," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "I'll go with you." He nodded once, like he'd expected it. "Then we'd better get you settled before dark. These mountains don't wait for anyone." As she grabbed her bags and followed him to his horse, Abigail touched her mom's ring one last time. Whatever was coming, she wasn't the scared girl left alone in the wilderness anymore. She was a woman who'd made a tough choice and would live with whatever came next. The marriage paper sat flat on Silas's kitchen table, the ink still wet from the traveling preacher's careful writing. Reverend Morrison didn't ask questions when Silas asked for the wedding, though his old face looked worried for the young woman standing next to the mountain man, her hands folded and her eyes on the floor. "Do you, Abigail Henderson, take this man as your husband?" The preacher's voice was serious, even in the simple cabin. "I do." Her words came out quiet, almost a whisper in the lamplight. "And do you, Silas McGrow, take this woman as your wife?" "I do." His voice was strong, final, like a guy closing a deal he'd thought hard about. "Then, by the power given to me by Montana Territory, I say you're husband and wife." There was no kiss, no party, not even smiles. Reverend Morrison packed his Bible, took the coins Silas gave him, got on his horse with a tip of his hat, and promised to pray for them. The whole thing took less than 10 minutes, but it changed everything. Now, 2 hours later, Abigail sat on the edge of the bed in her new home, still wearing the plain blue dress she picked for her wedding day. Silas gave her time to settle in, to look around the cabin and get used to the place that would be her life now. It was bigger than her family's old place, with a real kitchen, a sitting area with actual store-bought furniture, and shelves with more books than she expected. The bedroom had a solid bed with a real mattress, not just furs and blankets. Everything showed a guy who took time to build something strong, something meant to last. This wasn't a temporary shack, but a home for someone planning to stay. Silas came to the doorway, having changed into a clean shirt and washed up, though his hair still showed where his hat had pressed it down. In the lamplight, she saw how carefully he stood, knowing this moment was important for both of them. "You ready?" he asked, his voice softer than she'd heard before. She nodded, not sure her voice would stay steady. Everything felt unreal. Married to a stranger in his cabin, about to keep the deal that saved her life. Silas walked over slowly, his steps careful. When he sat beside her on the bed, she smelled the soap he had used and the faint wood smoke that stuck to everything in the cabin. "Abigail," he said, and hearing her name in his voice made it all feel more real. "I want you to know something. Our deal helps us both, but that doesn't mean it has to be bad." She looked at him, really looked, and saw something new in his face. Under his tough, practical side, there was a little worry. This guy, who seemed so sure about everything, wasn't sure how to handle this moment. "I've never been married before," she admitted. "I don't know what I'm supposed to do." "Neither have I," he said, surprising her. "I mean, I was married once, but it was different. We had time to get to know each other. This is new for both of us." That helped somehow. Knowing he didn't have all the answers, that he was figuring it out too, made him seem less scary and more like a regular person. "Will you tell me about her?" Abigail asked. "Your first wife?" Silas was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he did, his voice carried old sadness. "Her name was Mary. We met in town. She was a schoolteacher, kind and gentle. She thought living in the mountains would be an adventure." He stood and looked out the window into the dark. "She died giving birth to our daughter. The baby lived 3 days. They weren't strong enough for this life." The pain in his voice was clear, and Abigail understood him better. This wasn't a guy who thought women were just things to use. He'd loved and lost, and that loss shaped everything he did. "I'm sorry," she said, and meant it. "That's why I need someone who knows what these mountains take," he said, turning back to her. "Someone who's shown they can survive here. I can't go through that again, watching someone I'm responsible for suffer because they weren't ready for this life." His honesty hit her hard. His offer wasn't about using her. It was about finding someone who could handle what killed his first family. In his mind, choosing her was about protecting her as much as getting what he needed. "I understand," she said, and for the first time, she really did. When he sat back down, the space between them felt different, still awkward, but not scary anymore. They were two people who made a practical choice in a tough situation, and they'd have to figure it out together. "We don't have to do anything tonight," Silas said quietly. "You've had a big day. We can take time to get used to this." That surprised her. She thought he'd want to start their deal right away, like it was just a job to finish. Instead, he was giving her space to adjust. "Thank you," she said, meaning it more than he knew. They talked for another hour, sharing little bits about their lives. She learned he could read well and liked books, that he taught himself to cook better than most women she knew, and that he built most of the cabin's furniture himself. He learned she helped her dad with trapping before he died, that she could shoot well enough to hunt small animals, and that she'd kept her family's cabin going alone for 2 years. When they went to sleep, Silas made a bed on the floor with blankets and a pillow, leaving her the real bed. It was a small thing, but it meant a lot. He was keeping his promise to treat her with respect, making their deal something they could both live with. As Abigail lay in the dark, listening to his breathing and the cabin's creaks, she realized her old life was really over. Tomorrow, she'd wake up as Mrs. Silas McGraw, tied to a man she barely knew by law and need. But for the first time since his shocking offer, she wasn't scared. She felt something that might, with time and patience, grow into more than just surviving. Abigail's sewing kit was open on the kitchen table, her mom's silver needles shining in the morning light from the cabin's east window. The familiar feel of the thimble on her finger and the rhythm of fixing Silas's torn shirt gave her some comfort in her first week as his wife. It was one of the few things that felt normal in this new life, where her hands knew what to do without her brain worrying about everything else. "You don't have to fix that," Silas said from where he sat sharpening his hunting knife by the fireplace. "It's old anyway. It's good fabric," she said, not looking up. "My mom always said wasting stuff is wrong when others have so little." She heard him stop sharpening, the scrape of stone on metal going quiet. "Your mom sounds like she knew how to handle things. She had to. Abigail tied off the thread and checked her work. The tear was almost gone, her neat stitches blending with the fabric. Life out here doesn't let you be anything else. It was true, but the practical stuff she learned from her mom felt different in Silas's cabin. At home, she fixed clothes because they couldn't buy new ones. Here, she did it because it felt like building something, taking care of the guy who took her in, making their space cozy and organized. The past week had been like a careful dance, learning how they both moved through the day. Silas got up before the sun to check his traps and hunt, while she made breakfast. He'd come back with whatever he caught, and she'd help prepare it, her skills with a knife turning out to be more useful than either of them thought. Afternoons were filled with mountain life stuff, chopping wood, fixing tools, getting ready for the tough winter coming soon. "I'm checking the high traps today," Silas said, putting his knife down and testing the blade with his thumb. "Should be back before dark, but a storm's coming. If I'm not back by sunset, don't come looking. These mountains can kill you if you get stuck in bad weather." His casual talk about dying reminded Abigail she was still learning to live in a place where surviving wasn't guaranteed. Back in town, before her family moved to this far-off place, the worst thing was gossip or a bad harvest. Here, every day brought dangers that could end everything. "What do I do if you don't come back?" she asked, keeping her voice steady. "You know how to shoot a rifle?" "My dad taught me." "Good. There's a loaded gun above the fireplace and another by the bed. You've got enough food for 2 weeks if you're careful. If something happens to me, wait out the storm, then head to town. Don't try to make it through winter alone." His calm talk about dying shook her more than she wanted to admit. In the weeks since they got married, she'd gotten used to his steady presence, his quiet way of handling things. The idea of being alone again, losing the safety she'd just found, gave her a chill that wasn't about the storm. "Nothing's gonna happen," Silas said, seeing her face. "I've been in these mountains for years, but you need to know what to do just in case." That afternoon, after he left, Abigail felt restless in the empty cabin. She finished sewing, prepped vegetables for dinner, and organized Silas's books. With nothing else to do, she was alone with her thoughts for the first time since moving in. The loneliness surprised her. She thought she'd like having some time alone to think about all the changes. Instead, she kept listening for his footsteps, checking the window for him. In just a week, his presence had gone from okay to comforting. She got why he picked this deal over finding a wife in town. Most women wouldn't handle the loneliness, the constant danger, the way surviving mattered more than comfort. But for Abigail, who'd been alone for 2 years, having someone to share the load felt like a gift, not a loss. The storm Silas predicted came early, bringing wind that screamed around the cabin and rain that turned to icy sleet. Abigail kept the fire going and made hot food, knowing he'd be cold and hungry when he got back. As the afternoon turned to evening with no sign of him, she tried not to pace or stare out the window. When the door finally opened just before dark, relief hit her so hard she felt dizzy. Silas stumbled in, ice in his beard, clothes soaked, carrying rabbits, and looking like he'd fought the storm the whole way home. "Bad one," he said, hanging his coat and heading to the fire. "Came up faster than I thought." Abigail was already moving, pouring hot coffee and grabbing dry clothes. "I was worried," she said, then wished she hadn't. It sounded like she cared too much, and that might make him uncomfortable. Instead of ignoring her, he stopped drying his hair and looked at her with something like thanks. "It's been a long time since anyone cared if I got home safe." His words hung between them, making a moment that felt close and real. For the first time, Abigail saw the loneliness that made him want a wife this way. This strong, capable guy had been living for years with no one to share his worries or be glad he was safe. "Well, now you do," she said, handing him the coffee. As they ate dinner, with the storm raging outside and the cabin warm and safe, Abigail felt something big change. They weren't just strangers tied together by need anymore. They were partners, learning to count on each other in the most basic ways. Her mom's sewing kit, with its neat needles, sat closed on the table, a sign of the care she was bringing to his lonely life and her own promise to build something that would last. A carved wooden doll was hidden under old blankets in the storage room's corner, but Abigail's fingers found it while looking for extra quilts for winter. When she touched the smooth wood, she knew it was something special and private. The doll was beautifully made, with tiny details carved so carefully, a little dress painted in soft blues and whites, even tiny wooden shoes that could come off its little feet. This wasn't just something a guy made to kill time, it was art, made with love and tons of patience for a child. "What are you doing back there?" Silas's voice from the main room startled her, and she almost dropped the doll. "Looking for quilts," she called back, her voice a bit shaky. She gently put the doll back and grabbed some quilts, but the image of that tiny, perfect face stayed with her. At dinner, she watched Silas's hands as he cut his meat and buttered his bread. They were big, rough hands, worn from years of work, but she saw how carefully. He moved like a craftsman who paid attention to every detail. "Silas," she said carefully, "how long were you married before?" He stopped, his fork halfway to his mouth, his shoulders tightening. 3 years. And your daughter? How long did she live?" His fork clinked against the plate as he set it down. For a moment, she thought he wouldn't answer, that he'd hide in the quiet he used when things got hard. 4 days, he said finally. "Mary was in labor for almost 2 days. The baby came too early, too small. We knew she might not make it, but for 4 days we hoped." His pain was so clear, and Abigail's heart hurt for him. "What was her name?" "Rose," he said, barely whispering. "We were going to call her Rose. I found the doll," Abigail said softly. "The one you made for her." Silas froze, his hands flat on the table, eyes on his plate. "You shouldn't have gone through my stuff." "I wasn't. I was looking for quilts, and it was there." She reached over and touched his hand, surprised at her own bravery. "It's beautiful, Silas. The prettiest thing I've ever seen." When he looked at her, his eyes were shiny with tears he didn't let fall. "I worked on it while Mary was pregnant. Thought if I made something perfect, it might keep her safe. Foolish idea. It's not foolish to want to protect people you love," she said. "Love," he said, like the word tasted bad. "Love doesn't stop babies from dying or women from dying in childbirth. Sometimes I think love just makes losing hurt more." His raw honesty shocked her. That's why he treated their marriage like a business deal, why he kept it practical. He was protecting himself from the pain he'd already felt. "Maybe," she said carefully, "but love also makes life sweeter." They ate the rest of their meal, quietly, but something had changed. Abigail saw past his tough walls to the sadness he carried, and he trusted her with the memory of his lost daughter. When Silas cut his hand badly the next day while skinning a deer, she acted without thinking. "Let me see," she said, taking his hurt hand and looking at the deep cut across his palm. Blood was dripping steadily, and she knew it needed careful fixing. "It's fine," he said, trying to pull away. "Just a scratch." "It's not fine, and you know it." Her voice was firm, surprising them both. "Sit down and let me clean it." She worked carefully, cleaning the cut with whiskey that made him hiss, then wrapping it with strips of cloth from her own petticoat. Her fingers were gentle but sure, and she felt him watching her face as she worked. "Where'd you learn this?" he asked. "My mom. She took care of anyone who needed it in our town. Said healing was women's work as much as having babies." She tied the bandage and looked up to see him staring at her. "There, keep it clean and dry, and it should heal okay." "Thank you," he said, and his words meant more than just thanks. She heard him recognizing her, seeing she could care for him in ways beyond their deal. That night, as they got ready for bed, Silas spoke quietly while taking off his boots. "I want you to know something, Abigail. What we have isn't like what I had with Mary, but that doesn't mean it's worth less." His words felt big, saying he valued what they were building, even if it started from need, not romance. "I know," she said, and meant it. What they had was different, steadier, built on respect and shared challenges, but it was real, and it was theirs. 2 weeks later, she noticed she missed her monthly cycle. It brought fear and hope that made her dizzy. She was 20, married to a man who needed sons, living in a place where kids were both a blessing and a risk. Thinking of little Rose, who only lived 4 days, made her hand shake as she touched her flat belly. When she told Silas that evening, he stayed calm, but she saw hope in his eyes behind his practical worry. "We'll take good care of you," he said, his hand over hers on her stomach. "Both of you." For the first time since their wedding, Abigail believed what they had might be enough, not just for surviving, but for something close to happiness. A letter came on a gray November morning, brought by a mail rider who braved the early snow to reach the mountains. Abigail knew her Aunt Margaret's neat handwriting right away, precise like everything about her dad's sister. "Letter for you," Silas said, handing it to her with a face that hid his curiosity. Abigail's hands shook a bit as she opened it. She'd written to her aunt weeks ago, before the marriage, telling her about her parents' deaths and her tough situation. This reply took so long she thought it was lost or ignored. "My dear niece," the letter started in her aunt's formal way. "I was so sad to hear about Thomas and Sarah's deaths, and shocked you've been alone in that wild place so long. Your uncle and I talked, and we're ready to give you a home in St. Louis. James knows people in good homes where a young woman like you could work as a governess or companion. You'd get a room, food, and a small paycheck, plus a chance to live with proper people again. We know you might like where you are, but you must see a young woman of 20 shouldn't try to survive alone in such a place. Your mom would hate knowing what you've gone through. Please write back soon. If you agree, we'll send someone to bring you to St. Louis before winter gets bad. Think of this as our duty to family, and don't let pride stop you from taking help." Abigail read the letter twice, then set it down carefully. The offer was kind, more than she expected. A chance to live in a city safe and comfortable, without wolves, harsh weather, or the many dangers of mountain life. "Good news?" Silas asked, though his voice said he thought it wasn't. "My aunt's offering me a home in St. Louis," Abigail said, folding the letter neatly. "A job as a governess, room and board included." Silas froze, his coffee cup halfway to his mouth. When he set it down, it clinked softly in the quiet. "That's nice of her," he said finally. "Yeah, it is. When would you go?" His question felt sharp, like a knife. Abigail looked at his face, seeing he was trying to stay calm, and realized he expected her to leave. Of course he did. What woman would pick a hard mountain life over a cozy city one? "She wants an answer soon," Abigail said, not answering directly. "Before winter makes travel impossible." Silas nodded once, then stood quickly. "I should check the snares. Storm's coming and they need clearing." He was gone before she could reply, leaving her with the letter and its big choice. Through the window, she saw him move with his usual focus, but his shoulders were tense. Truth was, she hadn't really thought about leaving. In the weeks since their marriage, the cabin had become home in ways her old place never was. Here, she was needed. Her skills mattered. She made a difference in their daily survival. In St. Louis, she'd rely on charity, always feeling like the poor relative who needed saving. But it was more than that, and she was honest enough to admit it. The idea of leaving Silas hurt her heart. Somewhere in their careful teamwork, she'd grown to care for him, not just as someone who kept her safe, but as a person. She loved their quiet talks by the fire, how he listened when she spoke, the gentle way he treated her despite their odd start. And then there was the baby. Her hand went to her belly, where the first signs of pregnancy were showing. How could she tell her proper aunt she was pregnant from a marriage based on need, not love? How could she raise a child in a place that would judge her and the baby's roots? When Silas came back from checking snares, snow was falling hard. He shook, snow off his coat, and warmed his hands by the fire. "Find anything?" Abigail asked, glad for a normal question. "2 rabbits. Good for stew." He hung his coat and stood by the fire. "Letter still bugging you?" "She's not wrong," Abigail said suddenly. "About this being no life for a young woman. About my mom hating what I've gone through." Silas turned to her, his face serious. "Is that what you think? That you're just getting by here?" His question surprised her. "No, that's not what I meant. Because if you feel trapped or like you have to stay, maybe you should think about her offer. No one should feel stuck in a marriage. There was pain in his voice, carefully hidden, that made her look closer. He was trying to let her go, to make it easier for her to choose an easier life in St. Louis. "What if I don't want to leave?" she asked quietly. His hands stopped on the mantel. "What? What if I want to stay here? With you, even if I could have an easier life somewhere else?" Easier according to who? Abigail stood and walked to him by the fire. "Silas, in 2 months I've learned to clean game, read weather, fix wounds, and run a house that actually works. I found out I'm stronger than I thought. How is living on charity in a city where I know no one better than building something real here? And the baby?" he asked, his voice soft. "Our baby deserves to know both parents, to know where it comes from, not wonder why its mom left its dad." She saw hope in his face, replacing the worry since she read the letter. "You're sure?" Instead of answering, she took his hands. They were warm, rough from work, strong and steady. These hands could build a cradle, teach a kid to hunt, keep a family safe from mountain dangers. "I'm sure," she said. Silas's dad's compass sat open in his hand, its old brass surface worn but the needle still pointing true north. He looked at it in the lamplight while Abigail sewed nearby, the compass reminding him of his dad who taught him to understand the mountains and find his way by stars and rocks. "Your dad was a mountain man too?" Abigail asked, seeing him study the compass. Silas closed it carefully and put it in his pocket. "He was a surveyor for the railroad when they were moving west. Spent months in places no white man had been. This compass saved him more times than he could count, and he gave it to you. With everything he knew about reading the land, finding water, building shelter." Silas leaned back, his voice soft when he talked. "About the past. He said a man without direction is just waiting to die, but a man who knows where he's going can survive anything." The irony wasn't lost on him. Since he first saw Abigail struggling alone in her cabin, his own direction had changed. The quiet, lonely life he built after Mary's death had been shaken up by this young woman who turned out stronger and more adaptable than he expected. "Do you ever wonder if we're doing the right thing?" Abigail asked, putting down her sewing. "Building a life together like this?" Her pregnancy was showing now, a small curve that changed how her dresses fit and gave her a glow that caught his eye sometimes. She was 4 months along, healthy and strong, but he noticed how she sometimes touched her belly with both wonder and worry. "What do you mean?" "Most people marry for love or at least liking each other. We married to survive." She smoothed her skirt, a nervous habit he'd noticed. "Sometimes I wonder if we're shortchanging our kid, bringing them into a family that started with need, not feelings." Silas thought hard about her words. He'd wrestled with that question himself, especially at night, listening to her breathe and trying to figure out what grew between them. "My parents married for love," he said finally. "Big, crazy love that made them risk everything. And I watched my dad fall apart when my mom died. He loved her so much. Losing her broke him in a way that never fixed." He stood and looked out, at the snow falling for 3 days. "Maybe there's something good about a life built on respect and teamwork instead of just feelings. Is that what we have? Respect and teamwork?" He turned to look at her in the firelight, seeing the gold in her brown hair and the shadows on her face. He'd learned her every expression, from the stubborn set of her jaw when she worked hard to the soft smile when she thought he wasn't looking. "I think we have something that's growing into whatever we let it be," he said honestly. The truth was harder than he wanted to say out loud. What started as a practical deal had turned into something he didn't know how to name. He thought about her when he checked traps, hurried home not just because of weather, but to share little things from his day. He looked forward to their talks, how she listened and shared her own thoughts. "Silas," she said quietly, "when you look at me now, what do you see?" The question surprised him. "What do you mean?" "When you made your offer, you saw a woman who could handle mountain life, who could have your kids and help with work. Is that still all you see?" He knelt beside her chair, taking her hands. They weren't soft town girl hands anymore, but strong ones, with scars from knives and rope burns from hauling water, signs of a life with purpose. "When I look at you now," he said, his voice rough, I see the woman who stayed up all night. When I was sick, who argued with me about preserving meat because you knew a better way. I see someone who chose to stay here when she could have had an easier life. I see my wife, Abigail, not just a mom for my kids or a partner for survival, but my wife. The word meant more now than when they said their vows. Back then, it was just a legal step for their deal. Now it felt like a real bond, built through challenges and quiet understanding. I'm glad, she said, and he saw relief in her eyes. That night, a fever hit Silas without warning. Abigail woke to find him burning, hot, breathing hard, his skin sweaty. By morning, he was out of it, mumbling about compass directions and calling for his dad. The fever that killed her parents seemed to have found him, and for the first time since their wedding, Abigail faced being truly alone again. She spent 3 days caring for him, cooling his fever with wet cloths, giving him water when he could swallow. She talked to him constantly about the baby, their spring plans, anything to keep him holding on. On the 4th night, when his fever broke, she was holding his dad's compass, trying to figure it out in case she needed to get to town for help. North is that way, he said weakly. Silas. She put the compass down and touched his forehead, finding it cool. How do you feel? Like a bull ran me over. He tried to sit up and stopped. How long? 4 days. I thought I was going to lose you. Her voice broke, and she took a breath. Takes more than a fever to kill an old mountain goat like me, he said, squeezing her hand gently. Thank you for taking care of me. That's what wives do, she said, meaning it in ways she couldn't have imagined at the start. As he got better over the next weeks, their relationship changed again. The crisis stripped away their careful politeness, leaving something more honest. She'd seen him weak and helpless, and he'd trusted her with his life. They both learned what it meant to face losing each other, and it changed how they lived every day. I want to write to your aunt, Silas said one evening by the fire. Tell her you're staying, that you're settled and happy here. Are you happy? He asked. Really? He looked from her face to her growing belly and back. I didn't think I would be, he said. After losing Mary and Rose, I thought happiness was for other people. But what we're building feels right in a way I didn't expect, especially because it's not what we planned. He took her hand, a gesture that felt normal now. Sometimes the best things are the ones you didn't ask for. Outside, the wind howled, but in their warm, lit cabin, Abigail felt a peace she never knew was possible. A wanted poster was old and torn, but Silas McGrow's name was clear in big black letters at the top. Abigail stared at it, shocked, her hands shaking as she read the charges. Wanted for murder, $500 reward for killing Jeremiah Stone in Copper Falls, Montana territory. The bounty hunter who gave it to her was a thin man with cold eyes and a badge on his vest. He called himself Clayton Morse, said he worked for the territorial marshal, and showed up while Silas was checking traps. That's your husband, right? Morse asked. Sure, she'd answer. Silas McGrow, mountain man, married to a young woman named Abigail a few months ago. Yes, but this must be a mistake, Abigail said, forcing herself to look at him, though her heart was pounding. Silas wouldn't hurt anyone. He's not violent. Witnesses in Copper Falls say he shot Jeremiah Stone in cold blood over a mining claim. Stone was unarmed, begging for his life. Morse checked a little notebook with a showy move. 3 people saw it. McGrow left town that night and hasn't been seen since. That was 8 years ago. 8 years. It matched when Silas came to these mountains, building a home far from everyone. Abigail's mind raced, trying to match the gentle guy who carved a doll for his lost daughter with the killer the poster described. There's got to be an explanation, she said, but her voice sounded weak. Maybe there is. That's why I'm here to take him for trial, not just grab the reward the hard way. Morse folded the poster and put it in his coat. Where is he now, Mrs. McGrow? Checking traps. He'll be back before dark. Good. I'll wait. Morse sat in one of their chairs without asking, his hand resting on his gun. The hours that followed were the longest of Abigail's life. She made dinner while Morse watched her every move, making small talk that felt like threats. He asked about their marriage, how long she'd known Silas, if she ever thought he might be wanted. Sometimes women know, he said, as she stirred the stew. They notice things, like how a guy jumps at sudden noises or watches the horizon like trouble's coming. A guilty conscience shows if you know what to look for. Abigail thought about Silas's careful watchfulness, how he always seemed aware of everything, how he didn't talk much about his past. She thought it was just how you live in dangerous mountains. Now, it looked different. When Silas walked in at sunset, his reaction to seeing a stranger confirmed her worst fears. For a second, his face went blank, like a guy caught in a trap he hoped to avoid. Then he saw Morse's badge, and his face showed he'd given up. "Mr. McGraw," Morse said, standing slowly, "I think you know why I'm here." "I do." Silas put his rifle down carefully, raising his hands to show he wasn't grabbing a weapon. "Just let me say goodbye to my wife." "Silas, no!" Abigail stepped between them, her pregnancy making her clumsy, but her voice fierce. "Tell him it's not true. Tell him you didn't kill anyone." Silas looked at her, and something broke in his face. "I can't tell him that." His words hit like a punch. She expected him to deny it, explain it, anything but admit it. "What do you mean you can't?" "Because I did kill Jeremiah Stone," he said, calm as if talking about chopping wood. "Not the way they say, but I did kill him." Moore stepped forward, with handcuffs, but Silas held up a hand. "Give me a minute to tell my wife the truth. She deserves to know. Make it quick." Silas turned to Abigail, his eyes full of pain she'd never seen. "Stone wasn't just after my mining claim. He was running a bad place, using girls he kidnapped from towns around here. Some were just kids." Abigail felt sick as she started to understand. "I'd been tracking him for weeks after he took a girl from a family I knew, found his camp, found the girls he was holding." Silas's hands clenched. "I tried to arrest him the right way, but he went for his gun. In the fight, one of the girls got shot. She was maybe 15, and she died because I couldn't stop him fast enough. So you killed him." "I executed him." The difference mattered to Silas. "Shot him while he was reloading. The witnesses were his men. They weren't going to tell anyone about the girls or what Stone did." Morse listened, clearly doubting. "Nice story, McGraw. Too bad you can't prove it." "Actually," Silas said quietly, "I can." He moved slowly to a chest in the corner, keeping his hands visible, and pulled out a bundle of papers. Letters from the girls' families, statements from the ones I saved, even a confession Stone wrote thinking it'd save him. Morse read the papers, surprised, his confidence fading as he saw story after story of Stone's crimes. "Why didn't you show this 8 years ago? I was 26 and scared." Stone's men had the sheriff on their side, and I knew no one would believe a drifter over 3 big-shot townspeople. Silas's laugh was bitter, so I ran. Thought it was better to disappear than hang for doing right. Abigail's legs gave out, and she sat down as the truth hit her. Her husband wasn't a cold killer, but he was still wanted. Even if Morse believed him, their life was about to fall apart. "I have to take you in," Morse said finally. "Let a judge figure this out." "I know." Silas looked at Abigail, full of regret. "I'm sorry. I should have told you before we married. You deserve to know." "Would it have changed anything?" she asked, surprised at her calm voice. "I don't know. I hoped the past would stay buried." He knelt beside her, taking her hands. "But everything between us has been real. Whatever else I am, what we built was honest." Before she could answer, he stood, holding out his hands for Morse's handcuffs. "We can leave at first light. The trail's too dangerous at night, and my wife needs time to prepare." As the handcuffs clicked around Silas's wrists, Abigail realized everything she thought about her life was changing again. But this time, she wasn't facing it alone. She had something worth fighting for. Abigail's dad's rifle felt heavier than she remembered as she took it from above the fireplace. It was her dad's favorite, a sharp tool he used to feed the family. Now, hidden under loose floorboards while Morse napped in his chair, she checked it was loaded and hoped she had her dad's steady hands. "What are you planning?" Silas whispered, from where he sat, chained to a heavy chair by the fire. "Getting you out of this," she whispered back, so quiet Morse's breathing covered it. "Abigail, no. You'll make it worse for you and the baby." She stopped to meet his eyes. In the dim firelight, she saw his worry, not for himself, but for her and their unborn child, even as he faced capture and maybe death. His first thought was keeping them safe. "Remember what you said about your dad's compass?" she asked softly. "How a man without direction is just waiting to die. This is different. You can't fight the law. I'm not fighting the law. I'm fighting for the truth." She knelt beside him, keeping her voice low. "Morse doesn't want justice, Silas. He wants the reward money. He'll drag you to Copper Falls, and Stone's men will finish what they started 8 years ago. Even if that's true, running makes me look guiltier." "Then we don't run." Abigail touched her belly, where their baby was growing strong despite the chaos. "We make them come to us, on our terms, in land we know better." Before Silas could answer, a sharp pain shot through her back, so bad she gasped. The stress of the day, plus getting ready for a fight, was hitting her pregnancy hard. "What's wrong?" Silas's voice was tight with worry. "Nothing." Another pain, stronger, spread from her back to her belly. "Oh, no!" Morse stirred, his eyes opening to see them. "What's happening?" "The baby," Abigail said through gritted teeth. "Something's wrong with the baby." Morse jumped up, hand on his gun, checking the situation. "Is this a trick? Does she look like she's faking?" Silas pulled against his chains, desperate. "Let me help her, please." "Stay put." Morse walked over carefully, looking at Abigail's face in the firelight. Her skin was pale, and she was breathing fast as another pain hit. "How far along are you?" "6 months," she whispered. "Too early?" "It's too early." Her fear was real, and Morse seemed to see it. He wasn't cruel enough to let a woman suffer in childbirth while he watched. "All right," he said finally. "I'll unlock him to help you. But if either of you tries anything—" "We won't," Silas said fast. "Just let me get her to the bed." Morse freed Silas, keeping his gun ready as Silas helped Abigail to their bedroom. The pains were stronger now, and she felt wetness between her legs. Maybe blood, maybe birth fluid, she couldn't tell in the dark. "Talk to me," Silas said, helping her lie down. "How bad is it?" "Bad, but not—" She stopped as another pain hit. "Not like it's time yet. Something's wrong." From the main room, they heard Morse pacing, clearly uneasy. He came to catch a bounty, not deliver a baby in a mountain cabin. "Listen," Silas said softly, just for her. "Whatever happens tonight, you and this baby are the best things in my life. If something goes wrong—" "Nothing's going wrong," Abigail said, gripping his hand hard. "We're all getting through this together." But her body was fighting back against the stress and fear. The baby wasn't ready, but her body seemed to be pushing it out. She'd heard of women losing babies from early labor caused by shock, and that scared her more than any bounty hunter. "We need help," she said suddenly. "Real help. There's a woman in the next valley, Mrs. Patterson. She's helped with tough births before." "That's a 2-hour ride in good weather," Silas said, "and a storm's coming." As if he'd called it. Wind screamed around the cabin, bringing snow that promised a big storm. Through the window, they saw the weather getting worse fast, the kind of mountain storm that could trap people for days. "We can't stay here," Abigail said, another pain making her gasp. "If the baby comes too early, if something goes wrong—" "I know." Silas looked toward the main room where Morse paced. "Let me talk to him." When Silas went back, he found Morse by the window, watching the storm grow. "How is she?" "Not good. The baby's coming too early. Without help, we could lose them both." Morse turned, and for the first time he looked truly worried, not just focused on his job. "What do you need?" "Safe passage to get her to someone who knows about tough births. There's a woman in the next valley who's helped before. In this weather, we'd never make it. We have to try." Silas met his eyes. "I know you've got a job, but she's innocent. The baby's innocent. They shouldn't die because of my past." Morse studied Silas's face for a long moment. "You really love her, don't you? This isn't just about your deal. She's my wife, my family. Whatever I am, I won't let them suffer for my mistakes." A cry of pain from Abigail cut through them. When Silas moved toward it, Morse didn't stop him. "Go," he said quietly. "Help your wife." Abigail was gripping the bedpost when Silas reached her, her knuckles white as she got through another pain. "It's getting worse," she said when she could talk. "And there's bleeding. Definitely bleeding now." Silas felt cold fear. He'd lost Mary to childbirth, and losing Abigail the same way was unthinkable, but she was tougher than Mary, more resilient. She'd survived alone in the mountains for 2 years. She could survive this. "What do you need me to do?" he asked. "Help me sit up. Walking might slow the pains." She leaned on him as she stood, pausing as another wave hit. "And Silas, if something happens to me, nothing's happening to you." "If it does," she said firmly, "promise you'll tell our child the truth about why we married. Not just that it was need, but that it became real, worth fighting for." "I promise," he said, though it felt like giving up. As they moved to the main room, they found Morse packing supplies with grim focus. "I've been thinking," he said without looking up. "That reward money's no good if I freeze getting it. Maybe we should all try for Mrs. Patterson's place." "You'd risk the storm?" Silas asked, surprised. "I've been in worse," Morse said, slinging his bags over his shoulder. "Besides, I've got a wife in Denver. If she was in trouble, I'd want someone to help, even if that guy was wanted." Outside, the wind howled, and snow fell so thick they could barely see. But with Abigail's labor moving fast and no other help, they had no choice but to face the storm and hope to reach safety in time. As they got ready to leave the cabin that had been their safe place, Abigail touched her belly one last time. Whatever happened next, she was determined her child would have a chance, and the man she'd grown to love would be there to raise it. The baby's first blanket was spread across Abigail's lap as she worked the loom, her swollen fingers moving carefully despite the pain of contractions. She'd started weaving it months ago during winter nights when Silas read by the fire, using soft wool she traded for in town and dyeing it with berries she picked. The pattern was simple, but pretty, cream and pale blue stripes like a piece of sky. "We should have left for Mrs. Patterson's hours ago," Morse said from the window, watching the blizzard get worse. "This storm's only getting bad." "Can't travel in this," Silas said, his voice tight as he watched Abigail struggle through another pain. "We'd lose the trail in a mile." His words stopped when Abigail cried out. This pain was different, stronger and longer, leaving her gasping and pale. "The baby's coming," she said simply. Now, Silas felt his world crash. He'd delivered animals, but never a human baby, and not one coming 2 months early in a blizzard, with no help. Every part of him screamed this was too much, but there was no one else. "Tell me what to do," he said, kneeling by the bed where she'd settled. "Hot water, clean cloths, and that blanket. I want it ready for the baby." Morse left the window and added wood to the fire, trying to help in a situation he wasn't ready for. "How long does this take?" "Could be hours," Silas said, but he worried it might be faster. Abigail's labor was moving quick since it started, and early babies often came fast. "Silas!" Abigail's voice was strained but strong. "Listen carefully. If something goes wrong, if you have to choose between me and the baby, that's not happening. If it does," she said, gripping his hand hard, "choose the baby. Our child deserves a chance." "You're both gonna be fine," he said, but he saw too much blood soaking the bedding, coming too fast. His mind went back to Mary's final hours, the helpless feeling of watching her slip away despite everything. Another pain hit, and Abigail screamed. When it passed, she was panting, pale and sweaty despite the cold. "I see the head," Silas said, his voice full of wonder and fear. "The baby's coming." The next hour was the longest and hardest of his life. With Morse getting hot water and cloths, and Abigail finding strength he didn't know she had, their son was born in the worst blizzard ever. He was tiny, so small, but his cries were loud and strong, filling the cabin with new life. "Is he okay?" Abigail asked weakly, as Silas wrapped the tiny body in her blanket. "He's perfect," Silas said, his voice thick as he gave her their son. Small but perfect. The baby's cries softened as he felt his mom's warmth. Even so, early, he seemed alert, his tiny fingers grabbing the blanket, but their relief didn't last. Outside, the storm was at its worst, shaking the cabin's walls, with snow so thick they couldn't see out the windows. And then they heard a sound that froze them all. Dogs barking, faint over the wind, but getting closer. "Company?" Morse said grimly, checking his guns. Sounds like more bounty hunters with tracking dogs. Silas felt ice in his veins. Stone's men had found him, drawn by rumors of Morse's success, but they didn't expect a newborn and a woman who just gave birth. "How many?" he asked, looking out into the storm. "Hard to tell. At least 3 or 4 riders, maybe more." Morse's voice was determined. "They won't wait for better weather. They'll want to finish this tonight." The sound of horses got louder, even over the wind. They were almost at the door. Abigail held their son closer, the blanket the only shield between him and a world now more dangerous than the storm. The sheriff's badge shone in the firelight as Marshal Thomas Kane stepped into the cabin, snow on his coat and ice in his gray beard. 2 deputies followed, hands on their guns but not drawn, looking around with sharp eyes. "Well," Caney said, surprised to see a newborn and a woman in bed. "This isn't what we expected." "Marshal Caney," Morse said, stepping forward, relieved. "Didn't expect you in this weather. Heard you tracked McGrow here. Had to see for myself." Caney's eyes went to Silas, standing protectively near Abigail and their son. "You're hard to find, McGrow." "I wasn't hiding from the law," Silas said carefully. "Just trying to live away from trouble. Trouble follows a man, doesn't it?" Caney took off his hat, shaking off snow, his moves calm. "Especially a man wanted for murder." "Marshal," Morse started, "there's stuff you should know. McGrow's got proof Jeremiah Stone was a kidnapper and killer." "I know," Caney said. "Got a telegraph from the territorial governor 3 days ago. A federal marshal in Colorado caught Stone's old gang. They told a different story about Copper Falls 8 years ago." The words hit like lightning. Silas felt his knees shake as Caney's meaning sank in. "What are you saying?" Abigail asked from the bed, her voice weak but hopeful. "Your husband's cleared of all charges," Caney said. "The men who testified against him admitted they lied. Stone was running a kidnapping ring, like McGrow said. Federal marshals found proof he took over a dozen girls from the territory." Morse stared, shocked. "Then why are you here?" "To tell McGrow the charges are dropped and apologize for the territory not checking his story right 8 years ago." Caney's face was serious. "But we also learned Stone's buddies put a private bounty on McGrow to keep him quiet. They've been hunting him for years." "How many are still out there?" Silas asked. 3 we know of in this area, drawn by rumors Morse found you." Caney nodded to the door. "We passed their camp 2 miles back. They're waiting out the storm, planning to come at dawn." Abigail shifted their son, who stirred at her tense voice. "What does this mean for us?" "It means you can live without looking back once we catch Stone's men," Caney said. "That's our job, not yours." One deputy looked at Silas's papers. "Marshal, see these. Letters from the girls' families, even Stone's confession." Caney read them with interest. "McGrow, why didn't you show this 8 years ago?" "I was young and scared. Stone's men had the sheriff bought, and I knew no one would believe me over 3 big townspeople." Silas moved closer to Abigail, his hand on her shoulder. "So I ran. Can't blame you. Corruption was everywhere back then, especially in mining towns." Caney handed back the papers. "These will clear your name for good. The territory wants to make this right." "What about the men still hunting him?" Abigail asked. "They won't stop just because you say so." "They will when they're in jail," Caney said firmly. "We've got warrants for all 3. Murder, kidnapping, conspiracy. They'll be lucky not to hang." Caney's confidence helped, but Silas couldn't fully relax after years of threat. "How will you catch them?" "We'll use the storm. They're in a shack 2 miles away, sleeping off. Whatever they drank to stay warm. We'll surround them at dawn." "I want to go with you," Silas said suddenly. "No way," Abigail said before Caney could answer. "You've got a new son and a wife who just gave birth. You stay here." Caney nodded. "She's right. You've done enough, McGrow. Let the law handle it." As dawn came and the storm started to calm, Caney and his men got ready to leave. Before going, Caney turned to Silas. "One more thing. The territory wants to pay you for the years you were on the run. It won't fix things, but it's them saying they messed up." "I don't need their money," Silas said. "I just want to live in peace with my family." "Even so, you earned it, and with a baby, you'll have costs." Caney put on his gloves and hat. "We'll be in touch after we deal with Stone's men." Morse, who'd been quiet, stepped forward. "Marshal, what about my contract? You found Him, so we can clear his name. The territory will pay your fee." As the lawmen rode into the dawn, Abigail watched from the window, their son sleeping in her arms. "Is it really over?" she asked. "I think," Silas said, sitting beside her, "we can stop looking back and start looking forward." The baby moved in his blanket, making soft, happy sounds. For the first time in 8 years, Silas believed his past wouldn't ruin his future. "What should we name him?" Abigail asked, looking at their son's tiny face in the morning light. "I was thinking Thomas after your dad. Thomas McGrow," she said, smiling. "I like it. Thomas McGrow, born free." Outside, the storm was gone, leaving a world covered in snow and full of new possibilities. Whatever came next, they'd face it together, not as strangers tied by need, but as a family built by choice, tested by trouble, and strengthened by love that grew from the most practical start into something worth any fight. The family picture sat against the kitchen table, its charcoal lines showing a quiet, happy moment Abigail drew during Thomas's afternoon nap. In it, Silas sat in his favorite chair by the fire, their 6-month-old son on his knee, while she stood behind, her hand on Silas's shoulder. It wasn't a fancy pose, just them on a normal evening, comfortable together in a way that took time to grow. "That's good," Silas said, looking over her shoulder. "You captured something real." "I wanted to remember this," Abigail said, adding final touches to Thomas's round face. "How it feels now, all calm and settled." Spring came early to the mountains, bringing news that Marshall Caney caught Stone's last men. They were tried and got long jail sentences, ending the threat that followed Silas for 8 years. The official pardon came by mail 2 weeks later, with a bank draft for more money than they expected. "Hard to believe it's been a year since I knocked on your door with that deal," Silas said, sitting down and picking up Thomas, who was fussing in his cradle. "Feels like forever ago." Abigail put down her charcoal and watched Thomas calm in his dad's arms. He had Silas's steady nature and dark hair, but her brown eyes, and he looked at the world like he got smarts from both of them. The cabin had grown over winter, with Silas adding a room for a nursery and workspace. He also built a workshop where he made Thomas's cradle, high chair, and toys with the same care as the doll for his lost daughter Rose. "I've been thinking," Silas said, bouncing Thomas gently, "about what's next for us." "What do you mean?" "The territory offered me a job as a federal marshal for this area. The pay's good, and we could expand the homestead, maybe build a real house." Abigail studied his face, looking for how he felt. "What would you do?" "Keep peace in remote spots, track wanted men, settle fights between settlers and miners. I'd be gone sometimes, but not long." He adjusted Thomas. "But I'm not sure I want to chase other people's problems when I could be here building with you and Thomas, and any other kids we might have." "Another?" Abigail said quietly. "Not yet, but I hope someday. Thomas needs siblings, and we've got room now." Horses interrupted them. Through the window they saw a small group, a man, woman, and 2 kids, looking tired but determined. The man led a pack horse, with household stuff. "Expecting company?" Silas asked, checking his rifle. "No, but they don't look like trouble," Abigail said. "The woman's holding a baby, and they look like settlers." Silas opened the door, and the man took off his hat. "Mr. McGrow, I'm James Morrison. This is my wife, Elizabeth. We heard in town you might help folks wanting to homestead here." "Help?" Silas looked at Abigail, who stood in the doorway with Thomas. "About finding good land, what winters are like, how to survive." Morrison's voice was respectful. "The territory office said you know these mountains best." Elizabeth stepped forward, bouncing her fussy baby. "We've got savings for land and supplies, but we need to know we can handle it. We heard you and your wife built a good life here." Abigail and Silas shared a look. These weren't the first settlers asking for advice, and probably not the last. Word spread that the McGrows didn't just survive, but thrived, making a homestead others could learn from. "Come in," Abigail said, stepping aside. "You look like you need food and rest." As Elizabeth settled her kids by the fire and took Abigail's coffee, she looked around. "This is what we want. A real home, not just a place to get by." "It took time," Silas said honestly. There were moments we weren't sure we'd make it. But if you work hard and help each other, you can build something that lasts. That evening, after the Morrisons camped near the cabin, Abigail and Silas sat on their porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and pink. "You didn't answer about the marshal job," Abigail said, leaning on his shoulder. "I think my answer's here," he said, pointing to the peaceful scene. "Settlers are coming to us for advice. We've got a son who'll grow up knowing these mountains, and a chance to build something that lasts. Why trade that for a badge and problems?" Thomas made a happy sound in Abigail's arms, and she smiled at their family. They'd grown from a practical deal into something neither dared hope for when they said their vows. "From tonight on," she said softly, repeating the words that started it all, "we exist to build something beautiful." In the twilight, with their son sleeping between them and the mountains watching over their little world, they knew they already had.